The rain had been falling since dawn, painting the streets of New York in shades of steel and regret. Beneath the Brooklyn Bridge, the East River looked like a sheet of molten glass, restless, cold, and unforgiving. Detective Benjamin Hard stood by the edge of the cordoned area, his coat collar turned up against the wind. The sound of sirens had faded, only the rhythmic patter of rain remained, tapping on umbrellas and police cars. A few officers still moved around, their breath visible in the chilled air. On the ground lay a man, late 40s, well-dressed, a pistol in his right hand, and a folded note clutched tightly in the other. His name was Tom Lawrence, a respected journalist known for exposing things people preferred to keep buried. "Suicide," said Detective Moore, exhaling cigarette smoke that mixed with the fog. "Clear as day." Note, gun, motive, he was under pressure. "Maybe finally broke." Benjamin didn't answer. His sharp, gray-blue eyes moved over the scene with mechanical precision, recording every detail. The gun. The splatter pattern. The scuffed leather of the victim's shoes. The faint trace of mud that didn't match the riverbank's texture. Something was wrong. He crouched beside the body, careful not to step in the pooling water. The note had bled slightly from the rain, but the words were still legible. "I'm tired of fighting ghosts. Forgive me." Benjamin frowned. He was left-handed, he murmured. Moore raised an eyebrow. "And?" "The gun's in his right hand," Benjamin replied softly, standing up. "And these scuff marks, someone dragged him a few inches before laying him down. You see this?" He pointed to a faint indentation in the mud. "That's not a collapse. That's placement." Moore cursed under his breath. "Christ, Hard. You never make my life easy." Benjamin smirked faintly. "If it were easy, you wouldn't need me." He walked a few steps away, lighting a cigar despite the drizzle. The smoke rose, twisting in the damp air. Across the river, Manhattan shimmered, beautiful, distant, indifferent. Behind him, the forensics team began packing up, content to call it suicide. But Benjamin's instincts hummed. He could feel the weight of something larger, something unseen. Later that evening, back in his Manhattan loft, the city lights poured through the wide windows. The smell of rain still clung to his coat as he sat at the piano, letting his fingers drift over the keys. Chopin, softly. Always Chopin. He opened the file he'd taken from the scene, Lawrence's wallet, a small notebook, and a photograph of a woman with dark hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. On the back, a name, Emily. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. There was a story here, one that didn't end under a bridge. He took a slow sip of green tea, watching the steam curl upward like a ghost. Somewhere, the city was hiding its truth, and Benjamin Hard had just found his next reason to chase it. The next morning, New York looked deceptively calm. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick with rain and reflections of passing cars gliding like liquid light. From the window of his loft, Benjamin Hard watched the city wake, coffee in hand and yesterday's case file open on his desk. He hadn't slept much. The image of Tom Lawrence's lifeless body still lingered, not because of death itself, but because of inconsistency. A suicide that felt staged. A note that read like a script. A man who died with the wrong hand on the gun. At exactly 9, there was a knock at his door. Soft, uncertain. Benjamin straightened his tie, opened the door, and met Emily Lawrence for the first time. She was pale, composed, dressed in black. Her hands trembled slightly, clutching a small leather purse. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Mr. Hard," she began, "I was told you were at the bridge yesterday." He nodded. "That's correct. Please, come in." She stepped inside, her gaze briefly sweeping across the loft, the piano by the window, the rows of books, the faint smell of cigar smoke. The space reflected its owner, controlled, intelligent, and slightly melancholic. "I don't believe my husband killed himself," she said without preamble. Benjamin gestured for her to sit. Then tell me why. Emily drew a shaky breath. Tom wasn't perfect, but he wasn't broken. He'd been working on something, a story. Said it was dangerous, but he never told me what. 2 weeks ago, he started getting calls. Late at night. He'd leave the apartment and come back hours later, nervous, like someone was watching him. Benjamin listened, silent, only occasionally scribbling short notes in his notebook. The night before his death, she continued, he told me that if anything happened, I should find you. He said you were the only one who'd look for the truth. Benjamin's pen stopped. He mentioned me. Yes. He said you once helped him with a story years ago, about the missing child in Queens. Benjamin remembered. That case had ended in corruption charges against 2 city officials and a scandal that almost cost him his license. He leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Lawrence, do you know what your husband was investigating? She hesitated. Only that it involved people in City Hall. He mentioned something about a charity foundation. The Seraph Fund, I think. Benjamin's expression darkened. He'd heard that name before, whispered in police bars, mentioned in half-burned reports. A supposed non-profit with too much money and too few public records. Emily opened her purse and handed him an envelope. Inside were 3 photographs, Tom with 2 unidentified men in suits, taken in a dimly lit restaurant, a page from a notebook with random numbers, and a small, torn receipt from a cigar lounge in Brooklyn. Benjamin studied the photos for a moment. You're right, he said quietly. Your husband didn't kill himself. Emily looked up, her eyes wet but hopeful. Then you'll find who did this. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city, endless and indifferent, full of secrets. Yes, he said finally. But you need to understand something, Mrs. Lawrence. If your husband was chasing the truth, whoever stopped him won't hesitate to come after anyone doing the same. Emily rose slowly. Then be careful, Mr. Hard. Benjamin gave a faint, wry smile. Careful is not what I'm known for. When she left, the loft fell silent again. Benjamin placed the photographs beside the one he'd taken from the crime scene, the same woman, the same smile that didn't reach the eyes. The Seraph Fund. A name from the shadows. And now, another ghost to chase. The sign above the door flickered in dull gold, the velvet ember. A cigar lounge tucked between 2 forgotten buildings in downtown Brooklyn, the kind of place that didn't advertise but always had powerful clients. The faint hum of jazz spilled through the entrance, mixing with the smell of aged tobacco and old money. Benjamin Hard stepped inside, shaking the drizzle from his coat. The air was warm, heavy with smoke. A few men in tailored suits sat in the corner, their laughter too controlled to be natural. The bartender gave him a polite nod, recognition, not welcome. Benjamin approached the counter. Scotch. Neat. The man poured without a word. Benjamin let the silence stretch before sliding the receipt Emily had given him across the bar. This was signed 2 nights ago. Recognize it? The bartender hesitated, eyes flicking to the name on the paper. Tom Lawrence, he muttered, then glanced toward the private booths at the back. He was here. Came in alone. Stayed maybe half an hour. Then someone joined him, tall, gray suit, no name on the tab. Haven't seen the guy before. Benjamin leaned forward slightly. Do you remember what they talked about? The bartender hesitated again, lowering his voice. Something about documents. The journalist was nervous. The other one wasn't. Benjamin placed a 20 on the counter and stood up. If that man comes back, don't remember me. He made his way to the back of the lounge. Booth number 6, private, curtained, with a faint trace of cologne and cigar ash. He knelt, checking under the table, and found it, a torn matchbook with a faint stamp, SF. Seraph Fund. As he turned it in his hand, the door to the lounge opened. A man stepped in, umbrella dripping, gray suit. The same description. Benjamin's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. The man's face was sharp, professional, government clean. Too clean. Benjamin slid the matchbook into his pocket and moved toward the exit, pretending not to notice. But as he reached the door, he caught a reflection in the mirror behind the bar, the man watching him, expression unreadable. Outside, the rain had started again. Benjamin walked quickly down the street, coat collar high, the city's rhythm pressing in around him. When he glanced into a store window, he saw the gray suit behind him, half a block away. He turned left into an alley. The hum of traffic faded, replaced by dripping pipes and distant thunder. He waited. When the shadow appeared at the corner, Benjamin struck first, swift, precise. A twist of the wrist, a shove against the wall. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man didn't answer. His training showed, steady breathing, no fear. Then Benjamin saw it, a small pin on his lapel, engraved with a pair of angel wings. Seraph. Benjamin stepped back. "Tell whoever you work for, they're already too late." The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "Are we?" he said softly, before disappearing into the night crowd. Benjamin stood in the rain for a moment, heart steady, mind racing. Someone had known he'd come here. Someone had been watching since the bridge. Back in his loft, the matchbook lay open beside the photograph of Emily's husband. The letters SF gleamed under the lamplight like a signature of something vast and dangerous. He poured himself a glass of scotch, sat at the piano, and played a single, hollow note. This wasn't about one dead journalist anymore. It was about the kind of truth powerful men buried. And the kind of man foolish enough to dig it up. The New York City Police Archive was not a place meant for visitors. It sat beneath an old precinct on the Lower East Side, a concrete labyrinth of dust, silence, and forgotten truths. Benjamin Hard had been there before, years ago, when the air smelled less of neglect and more of bureaucracy. Now it smelled like decay. He signed in under a false name, nodding briefly to the bored clerk who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. The hallway stretched before him, lined with metal shelves heavy with paper ghosts, reports, photos, names that time had erased. Benjamin moved with purpose. He already knew what he was looking for, the Seraph Fund, and any mention of Tom Lawrence. The files weren't digital. Too old, too dangerous. That was both the problem and the advantage. Whoever had tried to bury them didn't expect someone to dig through real paper. He found the section marked Civic Foundations, 2009 to 2015. Dust rose as he slid open the drawer. Dozens of folders. He flipped through them quickly, eyes scanning names and dates until one caught his attention. Seraph Fund, Internal Affairs Inquiry, closed. He pulled it out. The report was thin, too thin for a foundation that supposedly handled millions. Inside were 3 pages, a brief investigation summary, a list of board members, and a red stamp, case terminated, no further action. Benjamin frowned. 2 of the listed board members were familiar. One was a retired police captain. The other, a deputy from the mayor's office. He photographed the pages with his phone, careful to capture every detail. But when he turned the last page, he found something odd, a small tear mark, as if several sheets had been ripped out. At the bottom, faintly visible under the light, was a handwritten note, cross-check, Lawrence. His breath stilled for a moment. Tom Lawrence had been under investigation with the Seraph Fund. That wasn't a coincidence. He flipped the folder, searching for any trace of what had been removed, when the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Benjamin closed the file instantly, sliding it back into the drawer. The lights flickered once, old wiring or something else. "Mr. Hard," came a voice from the shadows. Calm, measured. "You shouldn't be here." A tall man stepped forward, wearing a gray suit. The same kind of gray he'd seen in the cigar lounge. The same subtle pin, angel wings glinting in the low light. Benjamin's voice was cool. You people really don't like leaving a trail, do you? The man smiled faintly. You misunderstand. We don't erase things. We redirect them. Benjamin took a slow step back. Is that what happened to Lawrence? The man didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the exit. You should go home, Mr. Hard. Enjoy your piano. Forget the name Seraph. Benjamin held his gaze, memorizing every line of the stranger's face. I don't forget names. Especially not the ones people tell me to. The man's expression didn't change, but his tone grew colder. Then you'll end up like him. When Benjamin blinked, the man was gone, melted back into the maze of shelves, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of cigar smoke. Benjamin exhaled slowly. The message was clear, he wasn't just digging in old dirt, he was standing on someone's grave. Back in his loft that night, he pinned the printed photos on a board, the bridge, the widow, the matchbook, the file. Lines of red thread began to connect them. At the center, one word, Seraph. He poured a cup of green tea, his reflection caught in the dark window glass. The city glowed beyond, unaware. Somewhere out there, someone was watching him, and he could almost hear the whisper behind the glass. Forget the name, Mr. Hard. He smiled faintly. Not a chance. The city hadn't slept, and neither had Benjamin Hard. Morning sunlight filtered through the gray haze of Manhattan, catching the thin curls of smoke from his untouched cigar. His loft was silent except for the rustle of papers, photographs, notes, and fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit. At the center of his board hung the same image he couldn't stop staring at, a woman with dark hair and a guarded smile, Emily Lawrence. The back of the photograph read only Emily, but something in the composition felt wrong. He'd seen that background before. Benjamin reached for another stack of photos, ones he'd taken from the Seraph Fund file the night before. Among them was a shot from a press conference 5 years earlier, a charity gala, all velvet and champagne smiles. Standing near the podium was a man in a gray suit, flanked by executives. Behind him, slightly blurred but unmistakable, was the same woman. Emily. But in the old photo, she wasn't a journalist's wife. She was standing next to the man at the microphone, Marcus Vane, director of the Seraph Fund. Benjamin leaned closer, tracing the faint outline of her face on the photo. She wasn't just an observer, she belonged there. The tilt of her shoulders, the poised smile, this was someone used to that world. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Hard, came a familiar voice, calm, distant. Emily. I need to see you. It's important. Benjamin's tone was even. I was about to call you myself. Where are you? An old cafe near the river, Pier Stone. Half an hour. Make it 20. When he arrived, she was already there, seated in a corner booth, fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her eyes were tired, rimmed red, but her composure hadn't cracked. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Benjamin sat opposite her. You could have told me you knew Marcus Vane. Her reaction was subtle, a blink, a slight tightening of her jaw. You found the photograph. I find many things, he said evenly. You used to work for the Seraph Fund. Emily exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of secrets. It wasn't what you think. I was an assistant. Briefly. Before Tom and I met. Briefly, Benjamin repeated. And yet, your husband died investigating that same organization. Her hands trembled slightly. I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid it would make me look guilty. Benjamin studied her. Every word, every flicker in her gaze. Mrs. Lawrence, the truth always looks guilty to someone. The question is, to whom? She looked down, voice barely above a whisper. They warned me, Benjamin. Before Tom died. Told me to stop asking questions. He wouldn't listen. Who warned you? She hesitated. A man named Vane. He said Tom was getting too close. That there were things not meant for the public. 2 days later, Tom was dead. Benjamin leaned back, expression unreadable. And now you come to me, the man your husband trusted, to do exactly what he died for. I don't have anyone else, she said softly. And I think they're watching me too. Benjamin's eyes narrowed slightly. Behind her, through the cafe window, he caught a reflection, a man in a gray coat, standing by a lamppost, pretending to check his phone. The same lapel pin. Angel wings. He rose from his seat. We're leaving. Now. Emily looked confused. What? Don't look back, he said, taking her by the arm. Just walk. They stepped into the street, rain beginning to fall again, light, persistent, the kind that soaked through time itself. As they turned the corner, Benjamin risked a glance behind. The gray figure was gone. Inside the car, Emily sat silent. Benjamin started the engine, his mind racing faster than the city lights outside. If Emily had once worked for the Seraph Fund, then she wasn't just a widow. She was a key. And keys, Benjamin knew, had a way of opening doors that should have stayed locked. The night pressed heavy against the windows of Benjamin Hart's loft. He parked across the street instead of pulling into his usual spot, a habit from older, darker cases. The rain had eased, leaving the air damp and electric, the kind of silence that carried warning. Something felt wrong before he even opened the door. The lock wasn't broken, it had been replaced. The faint metallic scrape where the mechanism didn't quite align was enough for Benjamin to know, someone had been inside, and they'd done it professionally. He drew his revolver, stepped in slowly, and flicked on the lights. The place was spotless. Too spotless. His piano, his books, even the faint trace of cigar smoke was gone, replaced by the sterile scent of cleaning solvent. The board on the wall, the photographs, the red strings connecting every lead, all of it had vanished. The only thing left was a single object placed carefully at the center of his desk. A green matchbook, embossed with a gold emblem, angel wings. Benjamin exhaled, forcing his pulse to steady. He picked it up, opened it. Inside, one unused match and a small folded note. You should have listened. He sat down, the old leather chair creaking under his weight. The city lights spilled through the windows, glinting off the empty walls. Someone had erased his work, every trace of it, as if the investigation had never existed. Not just a warning. A message. He checked his hidden safe behind the bookshelf. Empty. The files from the police archive, the photographs, even the copy of Lawrence's note, gone. But the intruder had left one more thing, taped to the inner wall of the safe, a photograph. It was of Emily Lawrence, taken through a window, unaware, her silhouette framed against the city's skyline. Benjamin's jaw tightened. He wasn't sure if it was meant as intimidation or as a test. Either way, the game had shifted. He dialed a number, one of his few remaining contacts in the NYPD. More, it's hard. I need a favor. Quiet one. Christ, Ben. You sound like you're in trouble again. I'm fine, Benjamin said, though he wasn't. I need background on a Marcus Vane. Director of the Seraph Fund. Everything you can find, official, buried, doesn't matter. Moore hesitated. You really want to poke that nest? I've heard whispers. People who ask about the fund tend to stop asking. Benjamin smiled faintly. Then I'll whisper louder. He hung up before Moore could argue. An hour later, the rain returned, light, rhythmic, tapping against the glass like distant footsteps. Benjamin poured a glass of scotch and sat at the piano, not to play, but to think. Whoever had broken in hadn't been after money or revenge. They'd come for control. to show him he was already inside their maze, and that every step he took was being watched. He stared at the matchbook again, its gold wings shimmering in the lamplight. Seraph. He knew what the word meant, messenger. But these angels didn't deliver salvation, they erased sins by burying the sinners. Somewhere in the city, Emily was hiding secrets. Marcus Vane was protecting them. And the Seraph Fund had just declared war in silence. Benjamin stood, pulled on his coat, and glanced once more at the empty wall where his caseboard had been. "You can erase the map," he muttered, "but not the man reading it." He locked the door behind him and disappeared into the night. The invitation arrived without warning, slipped under his door in a black envelope. No return address, only an embossed emblem of Seraph Fund, the same angel wings that had been following him since the cigar lounge. Benjamin Hart examined it carefully. A gala. A charity dinner. All the city's elite in one room. It was a trap, a show of power, and a chance, the only one he'd get, to see Marcus Vane in person. He wore a tailored suit, carefully chosen to blend in. Over the coat, a scarf hidden enough to avoid recognition. His eyes, gray-blue and calculating, scanned the surroundings as he stepped out of the cab and approached the building, historic mansion in Upper Manhattan, draped with lights that reflected off the wet streets. Inside, the air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Waiters moved gracefully, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The guests spoke softly, smiles tight and rehearsed, laughter measured like a score. Benjamin's entrance drew no attention, except for a subtle shift from the maitre d', who nodded politely, recognizing someone familiar with exclusivity but not their name. He moved among the tables, observing. There was Vane, tall, gray suit, perfectly groomed, a master of controlled charisma. Beside him, a few board members, laughing, exchanging private jokes that Benjamin could not hear but could almost read in their body language. Then he saw her, Emily. She was sitting quietly in the shadows near the stage, an unspoken signal of vulnerability, yet poised. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She gave no indication of recognition, though Benjamin noticed the tension in her shoulders. He approached a group of patrons discussing a recent city scandal. Pretending to be an interested outsider, he asked questions subtly, learning small but crucial pieces of information, a missing donation record, a vanished grant, names of journalists who had asked too many questions. The orchestra started playing, a slow waltz. Benjamin's attention never wavered from Vane. Timing, posture, the smallest gestures, all gave him insight into the man's psyche. Vane was confident, in control, but not invincible. A waiter brushed past him, offering champagne. Benjamin took a sip, all the while noting a server's glance, discreet, nervous. Someone here was feeding him information. Finally, the moment came. Vane stood to give a speech, voice smooth, words carefully constructed. Benjamin observed the audience, nods, smiles, silent bows to authority. No one questioned. Not openly, anyway. Then, as the applause ended, Benjamin slipped away to the back corridors. He found a small room labeled Archives. Inside, files neatly stacked, yet marked, restricted, executive use only. He began rifling through them. Documents, receipts, internal correspondence, the trail he had been chasing for weeks started to form. He found Tom Lawrence's handwriting in several memos, notes, threats, questions that had never been answered. Suddenly, a hand rested lightly on his shoulder. Benjamin turned sharply, gun drawn in a smooth motion, but it was only Emily. "Benjamin," she whispered, tension in her voice. "They're watching every exit. You can't stay here." He nodded, pocketing the documents. "I know. But now I see the pattern. The missing files, the erased evidence, the threats, everything leads here." She glanced at the papers in his hand. "Be careful. Vane's power goes further than you realize." Benjamin gave a faint, dry smile. "I've never done anything else." Together, They slipped into the shadows, leaving the gala behind, the angel wings of Seraph looming over them, silent, omnipresent, and waiting. The streets of New York at midnight were a mixture of emptiness and distant life. Benjamin Hard moved through them with the grace of someone who had walked every shadow, every alley, every secret corner. Rain had returned, a fine drizzle that blurred the city lights into long, silver streaks. He had set up surveillance. Cameras discreetly positioned near Emily's apartment, near Marcus Vane's office, even in the shadows outside the Seraph Fund gala building. He wasn't breaking the law, not exactly, but he was crossing lines he'd never considered crossing before. Tonight, Benjamin observed through the lens of a hidden camera. Vane exited a black SUV, flanked by two men in tailored suits. Every movement precise, rehearsed, controlled. One man handed Vane a folder, thick, sealed, clearly important. Benjamin's pulse quickened. That folder could hold the key to everything, the evidence Tom Lawrence had been chasing, the proof of corruption, and possibly the motive for his murder. He returned to his loft, a place that felt increasingly unsafe, and began piecing together the movements of those involved. Emily sat nearby, anxious but silent. She had insisted on helping, even though Benjamin had reservations. "Do you know who these men are?" she asked quietly, eyes on the monitor. Benjamin shook his head. "Not by name. But by instinct, dangerous. Professional. Not just hired muscle, people trained to erase threats." Suddenly, the camera feed flickered. A shadow passed too close to the lens, someone clearly aware of their observation. Benjamin's fingers twitched near the pistol in his coat pocket. "They know," he muttered. Emily's grip tightened on her teacup. "Should we leave?" Benjamin considered it for a moment. Leaving wasn't an option. Not now. Too much was at stake. Later that night, he followed Vane personally. The trail led to a private dock near the river, a place used for discreet meetings, shipping, and disappearances. Benjamin crouched in the shadows, eyes fixed on a small warehouse where Vane and his associates disappeared inside. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then movement. A figure approached the warehouse quietly. Benjamin recognized the gate, Emily. Her hands were empty, her face pale. He called softly, "Emily." She froze, her eyes wide, and Benjamin saw another shadow move from the building. Too fast. Too precise. A blow to the back sent him to the ground. Pain seared through his ribs. Instinctively, he rolled and came up swinging, fists connecting, but there were too many angles. Another figure grabbed Emily, pushing her inside. Benjamin scrambled after them, the rain turning slick concrete into a trap. He managed to get a glimpse, Emily disappearing into a side door, the warehouse doors slamming shut, the shadows retreating. He hit the door, it wouldn't budge. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. "Hard," a voice said from the darkness. Angel wings glinting in the faint light. "You shouldn't have come here." Benjamin steadied himself, breathing slow, mind sharp. "I warned you, I never listen to warnings." The figure laughed softly. "We'll see about that." Benjamin's heart pounded, adrenaline flooding his body. The first real fear in days, not for him, but for Emily. He backed away, eyes scanning for escape. The warehouse loomed, a fortress. The shadows were everywhere. And for the first time, Benjamin Hard understood, he wasn't just chasing the truth. He was being hunted. The warehouse smelled of damp wood and oil, a place forgotten by time but not by those who used it. Benjamin Hard had returned under the cover of darkness, determined. No hesitation. No mistakes. Inside, the shadows moved like living things. He had memorized the layout from surveillance, noting the blind spots, the routes for quick exit, and the faint creak of old floorboards. Tonight, he wasn't following anyone, he was leading himself to the truth. Emily's capture weighed on him. She wasn't just a witness anymore, she was a key to understanding why Lawrence had died. He needed answers, and the Seraph Fund's hidden archives might hold them. In the back of the warehouse, behind stacked crates and forgotten machinery, Benjamin found it, a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The faint smell of mildew suggested it hadn't been used in years. He drew his flashlight, the beam cutting through blackness, revealing a metal door with a combination lock. Careful hands worked over the dial, tracing the faint scratches of use. He had noticed patterns in Vane's office files, repeated numbers, subtle cues. With a soft click, the door swung open. Inside was a small room, walls lined with shelves filled with folders, envelopes, and boxes marked with dates and initials. Benjamin's heart raced. This is it. He began sorting through the documents. The first folder contained correspondence between Vane and city officials, bribes, cover-ups, threats. Another folder revealed lists of journalists, those who asked too many questions. And there, in a folder labeled Lawrence, Investigation, Benjamin found what he'd been searching for: Tom Lawrence's notes, photographs, and a partial manuscript exposing the Seraph Fund's corruption. The final piece of the puzzle was a USB drive taped beneath a shelf. Benjamin pocketed it carefully, the weight of it solid and real in his hand. He studied the papers further, and his eyes caught a detail he had overlooked: a series of signatures, each next to a coded number. They corresponded to missing donations, offshore accounts, and threats. One name repeated more than others: Emily Lawrence. Benjamin frowned. The widow wasn't just a bystander. She had been involved, at least peripherally, in the fund's operations. Yet the notes suggested coercion, manipulation, not voluntary participation. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from above. Someone had discovered his entry. Benjamin slipped the folders into his coat and quietly moved toward a side exit he had noted on the warehouse plans. A shadow fell across the stairs. "Looking for this?" a voice called. Marcus Vane stepped into the beam of his flashlight, calm, menacing. Benjamin faced him, steady. "I found everything. The lies, the corruption, Lawrence's murder. It ends tonight." Vane's smile was thin, controlled. "You think documents and photographs can stop me?" Benjamin raised a folder. "No. But the world can." Before Vane could react, Benjamin slipped down the stairs and into the shadows, folders clutched tightly. The sound of pursuit echoed, but he was faster, lighter, moving with the certainty of a man who had stared death in the eye before. Outside, the city was silent but alive. Benjamin glanced at the skyline, his pulse steadying. He had found the truth. Now he had to deliver it. And somewhere in the distance, a faint echo of angel wings seemed to whisper, "Not everyone survives knowing the truth." The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening under the first pale light of dawn. Benjamin Hart stood on the roof of his loft, the folders and USB drive secured in a waterproof bag. The skyline stretched before him, indifferent, beautiful, unyielding. He had pieces now. Names, dates, photos, recordings. Everything Tom Lawrence had risked his life for. And one revelation burned brighter than the rest: the murderer had been closer than anyone imagined. Not a stranger. Not a shadow in the night. Marcus Vane had orchestrated the entire scheme. But the trigger, the hand that pulled the gun on Lawrence, had been someone even closer: Emily Lawrence. Benjamin recalled the subtle inconsistencies, the fleeting glances, the faint hesitation when he confronted her at the cafe. She hadn't wanted Tom dead. She hadn't even anticipated it. But fear, coercion, and Vane's manipulation had driven her to a momentary betrayal, leaving Tom vulnerable, leaving the evidence for a staged suicide. Benjamin stared at the photograph of her taken in the fund's gala archives. She had been both victim and pawn, a reluctant participant in a game she hadn't fully understood. He sank into his chair, the city quiet beneath him, the folders open. There was a choice: expose everything, ruin lives, and ensure justice, or protect the few who had been forced into darkness, preserving some semblance of mercy. Emily's voice echoed in his mind, "They're watching every exit." He made his decision. The truth would come out, but selectively. Vane's empire of deceit, the corruption, the threats, exposed. The journalists silenced, the public lied to, finally vindicated. Emily would remain partially shielded, her coerced role hidden, her betrayal understood but not punished. Benjamin uploaded the evidence to secure channels, encrypted and sent to trusted contacts, ensuring that the story Lawrence had begun would reach the right people. He stood, lit a cigar, and watched the smoke curl in the morning light. The city was waking, oblivious. The shadows of Seraph Fund still lingered, but their power had been fractured. He placed the folders back in the waterproof bag, carefully sealing the USB drive. Justice had a cost, and Benjamin Hard was always willing to pay it. As he stepped out onto the balcony, rain from earlier dripped from the edges of the building. Somewhere far below, the East River glimmered, its currents carrying secrets and lies alike. Benjamin took a slow drag of his cigar. The case was closed. For now. But in the distance, the city whispered, shadows never truly vanish. And Benjamin Hard, silent, confident, unwavering, remained ready. The shadow had fallen. But the detective remained.